35% of all game developers are building for XR, according to the GDC industry survey. That's a large amount. I am very curious to see where they got these numbers, because 35%, that's crazy. I interact with the majority of people who are making VR games. I have a whole club, a school page, and most of the people who have ever wanted to or started making VR games know about this group and are in this group. And I feel like my numbers are very small. So 35%, let's see. I don't know. What do you think about that? Before we dive into this, what is your prediction? Do you think 35% is about accurate? Do you think 35% is more? Because this is all game developers, not even indie developers, all game developers. That's a crazy statistic. Let's jump in and see what they say. Despite industry woes, XR development has largely stayed consistent, according to the annual Game Developer Conference State of the Game Industry Survey, noting that 35% of developers who responded are building for XR. That's crazy. Okay, so a GDC survey. I do trust GDC. GDC is pretty big boys, so interesting. The San Francisco-based conference is a verifiable mecca for game developers across the industry, as it not only gives studios a chance to show off their wares, but also connect with community and gain bleeding-edge insight from some of the most important platform holder and game companies out there. Platformer holder. While annually held in March, GDC actually conducts its survey online late in the year, meaning the figures published below are fairly up to date. And for the first time, this year's State of the Industry survey included a section specifically asking whether respondents were creating XR content, revealing some interesting stats. As seen below, the top 5 most interesting platforms among developers were MetaQuest, obviously. Steam VR is 45%. Okay, nice. And then the Apple Vision Pro is 26%. That's actually pretty good. That is a large number of people who were, I guess, most interesting. So this is not necessarily the amount of people who are actually developing for, because Apple Vision Pro, I'm going to guess a very, very low number for that. PlayStation VR and Apple's smartphone-based AR kit. Interesting. Okay, so this is based on the 35%. So out of the entire group of people asked about this, 35% of them said they were developing currently for something in VR or have been working in it. And then out of that 35%, this is the breakdown of like what you're most interested in. So obviously Quest is going to be up there because Quest is the most popular one. And then Steam VR, second one, about almost half of everyone wants to make a Steam VR game. And then 1/4 of everyone wants to make a Vision Pro game. That's actually cool. I don't think 1/4 of them are actually going to, because Vision Pro it's ridiculously expensive to get into. So I'll put it like this. If you want to start developing for Vision Pro and you don't have any of the hardware, it's going to cost you about $8 grand to start developing for Vision Pro, because you need a Mac computer, whereas most VR developers have a Windows computer because it interfaces directly with the Quest. So that's going to be, $2 grand or however much that is. I also don't own the Mac, so I don't know. You're going to need the headset, which is $3,500. And then you're going to need Unity Pro, because you can only get the SDKs to develop for the Vision Pro if you have Unity Pro, which is wild. And that costs you $2 grand a year. So it's very expensive. So 2 plus 3.5 is 5.5 plus, however much you spend on a Mac computer. So another 2-3 grand or whatever. So yeah, about $8 grand minimum to just get started developing for the Vision Pro, which is wild. I don't understand. It's insane. So yeah, a very small number of people developing for the Vision Pro right now. All right, moving on. Granted, those aren't the platforms studios are necessarily developing for. Okay, we talked about that. As conference organizers maintain developers have gravitated to creating games for the Quest, Steam, and PC VR. Okay, so these are the actual numbers of people actually developing for that particular platform. So almost 60% for Quest, 31 for Steam VR, and then 16 for PSVR 2. And then while 26% of respondents may have been interested in the Vision Pro, only about 8, there it is. Only 8% are actually building something for Apple's mixed reality spatial computer, according to the survey. GDC notes it can't accurately compare these numbers to previous years since it was the first year the question was entered into the annual survey. Okay, so that'll be interesting. So next year, we'll actually be able to start to track the upward or downward trends of what developers are actually making games for, because everyone's like, oh, VR is dying. Nobody's making VR content anymore. This kind of proves otherwise. This is the first time this was asked. And so we've got 35% of people who are asked are saying, yeah, we're making XR content. And so next year we'll get to see if that number goes up or if that number goes down. That'll be interesting. That'll tell you whether or not VR is growing or not, is if the developers are making more games or not, because that's going to be a leading indicator. If the developers are going to stop making games, if you get less and less developers year over year, that means it's dying out. So that's going to be the true indicator, I think. So although the conference organizers maintain that the number of XR developers has stayed consistent, as have the platforms of choice, ostensibly, I can read, drawing from less formal polling methods. Okay, so they've kind of guesstimated that it's about the same based on previous data, but they don't really know. That's what they're saying. So this comes as the game industry has faced some difficult times lately with studio closures and layoffs affecting both traditional and XR studios across the board since 2023. Hearing XR development has remained consistent is encouraging news, however, as the install base for XR games and experiences is notably much smaller than traditional platforms, which may have otherwise discouraged studios from continuing XR projects in pursuit of more sure thing investments. Yeah, so that's what they're basically saying. A lot of the time, if you're an indie game developer and you want to make a sure thing, most people don't do XR because it's a little bit of a question mark. It's still a very new growing industry. Even though the industry has been around for more than 10 years now, we've only really just started to hit that kind of, there's starting to get a decent amount of headsets into like the regular people's homes versus like everyone who's just cutting edge excited about it. So we're kind of getting to the point where you could actually start to make a living off of VR games and stuff, but it's not really a sure thing. It's still a question mark in most people's heads. We're looking forward to hearing more about these insights at this year's GDC, which takes place March 17th through the 22nd. So if you're going to GDC, let me know. I don't know if I'm going to be going this year. So, but yeah, so 35% of all game developers are building for XR. That is a wild number. I'm really excited about that because it's promising. That means that the SDKs are stabilizing. That is one thing I'm super excited about, is the SDKs are starting to get to a point where it's like, okay, this is consistent. We don't have to learn a completely new set of tools every single 3 months because we're updating stuff. It's like, all right, we've kind of got an established XR interaction toolkit if you want to build a cross-platform game, or a meta SDK if you want to build specifically for Quest devices. Those have started to stabilize. They're starting to become some more common practices of this is how you do things. These are the button layouts. even that, like having a standardized controller layout is huge because it makes the games a lot easier to make because you just know what to expect. You don't really have to teach the player how to do stuff. Like, if you pick up a normal console game, you don't really teach the player where all the buttons are and what they're supposed to do. Whereas in VR, you kind of have to do that still right now. You have to like highlight that specific button, say, this is where the button is, instead of like, just press A, because people don't know. It's still so new. All the gamers are still so new to VR. So we're just cracking the surface. I think a lot of what is going to make VR incredible in the future is the apps that people are making. And so the hardware, I think, is to a good enough point. Like it's not amazing. It's not out of this world. I'm not saying that, but I think the hardware is to a good enough point now where we can absolutely make this a mass market thing. And it's really just up to you and up to me, the VR developers, the XR developers of this day and age, to make these awesome apps and this awesome content. So it's on you now. Is VR going to go up or is VR going to go down? What's the survey next year going to say?